Does this work now? Yes? Yay. It's always these things that they put behind the ear and everything, and when I normally have my hair open, I lost 4 or 5 of them in there already, so I can use old ones in there. It's just not fun. If you're a public speaker, never have curly hair, glasses, or earrings. Everybody hates you. So today, or here, I want to talk about HTML5 beyond the hype, and I've seen a few HTML5 talks here so far, and I was kind of surprised not to have any HTML5 in them. But actually a lot of frameworks that create HTML5 and people telling you that everything is far too hard, that's why you need to write an XML file to create some CSS and things like that. Now, me being a hardcore web developer for a long, long time, I know there's a place for frameworks, I know there is a place for things, and I'm very much aware that HTML5 has been hyped. We've been told by some fruit company from California that Flash is dead and that HTML5 is the thing to use. And then we started using it, and out of a sudden the browser didn't do the things that we wanted to do. And there was even weird things in there. I'm going to explain some of the APIs that are just hilarious when you look at them directly. And I just want to show you a few things that are now in browsers, across the browsers, even the bad ones, available for you to use. And you probably are not aware of because you just looked at the hype thing, didn't work, so you didn't look at the other thing. The problem that we do with HTML5 evangelism is we tell people the shiny things, and then we never tell them when we fix them. We're like, oh, it's broken, it's broken, it's broken, and the next one is almost there, almost there, almost there, but there's not many talks about this is available and you can use it. So there's not much to new things probably in there, but interesting bits and bobs. Let's start with CSS. I love HTML because when I started in '96, I opened a DOS edit and I started writing HTML, and I put it in a browser, and out of a sudden it did things for me. There was a table layout, there was an input box, there was a paragraph, there was a heading, and I didn't have to define that stuff because I came from assembly language on Commodore 64 where I had to define every pixel. And HTML did so many cool things for me. I just had to tell this piece of text is a paragraph, and out of a sudden it had a bit of margin and it had a bit of space around the other things. And this to me is still magic. Most people nowadays like, okay, I want to get rid of that margin because it's annoying. But if you think about it, anybody can become a publisher just by putting a few lines of text around other things, lines of text. And then I see people who just abuse HTML with everything that they can. Everything gets an ID, everything gets 15 classes, everything gets a data attribute because we can put all these things in there, and we need handlers for our frameworks and for our CSS to actually get into the thing. Instead of just looking at the structure of an HTML document and thinking about, like, what does this thing really do? If I use a button element, people can click that. People can also use the spacebar to activate it. People can, when they listen to the website but they can't see it, they know it's a button. If I use a div and I give it a class of button and a JavaScript to turn it into a clickable thing, out of a sudden I lost the person who cannot see it. I lost the person who has a keyboard only. I cannot focus on that thing. So a lot of HTML has a lot of inbuilt functionality that we keep overriding because we want to style it differently and stuff like that. And it's not hard. HTML is really, 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 really easy. It's sometimes confusing, yeah, but it's not that hard. So all of you know selectors probably in CSS. This is a P selector, which gives you all the paragraphs. This is a POOP selector, because there's object-oriented JavaScript, or POOP. And that one is a paragraph with the class of OOP on it. Then you have a hashtag. This is a paragraph with the ID of tag on it. And here's the interesting thing. What does an ID do? It identifies something once. The amount of people that ask me about Firefox when I still work for Mozilla, like yesterday, why can't I use more than one ID in a document? I'm like, how many passports do you have from the same country? One. This is an ID. You only use one. That's the idea of an ID. So no, there's no, when you use an ID, make sure it's really worthwhile. You don't put an ID on everything because it's easy. Then you have a class selector, but you don't. This is an attribute selector. So if a paragraph has any class, it applies that one. That could also be if it has a title, if it has a line, if it has something else. So any attribute can be selected that way. You can also get the value of that thing and test it. So every paragraph where the title is high there will get those CSS aligned to it. Every paragraph that starts with high in the title gets that applied to it. Every paragraph that ends with the high at the title gets that to it. Not many people use that stuff, but it's super useful if you think about it. Not necessarily on a title, but on other things. And then you have something where the title contains high anywhere in the string. And everybody always wants to, jQuery has these content selectors where you say like, if my paragraph contains the word elephant, style it this way. Great, because if you translate that website, you have to translate all your CSS as well. Don't get too connected with the content of it unless you know what you want to do. Then you have the P plus P selector. I don't say PP selector because that sounds wrong. It's a paragraph following a paragraph directly. Any paragraph following a paragraph. Then you got the child selector. It's a span following a P, and not a span inside a span would be styled by that, only on the first level. And then you got the tilde selector, which is a div that is on the same level as a paragraph. So that way you can style things around the element right now. So when we get very annoyed that CSS doesn't give us the same functionality that XPath gives us or the DOM gives us to navigate the whole document, we have this stuff and it's working now. There's a great article by Hayden Pickering called Semantic CSS with Intelligent Selectors, which shows you a lot of these things. What he did really well, he wrote a CSS font, a font that is actually applied to elements in the page. So you got like a LinkedIn, a Facebook, Google+, you got a mobile, PDF, doc, and so on and so forth. And normally what you do with applying those is that you come up with something, a title called Facebook, or a class called Facebook on a link. What he does instead is using these intelligent selectors. So if the href attribute of any element in the page ends with zip, you create that font, that glyph for that font, and it shows the zip folder next to it. That means in your HTML, you don't need to do anything. Why should I need to know what a class to apply to put a zip element or a zip image next to that link when the href already defines that? So his point of view was like, if people write HTML or write content, why should they need to learn programming? Okay, applying a class to an element is not really programming, but it's still quite a step for some people, and they should be concentrating on writing rather than just coding things. So this is what you would normally see, like a Twitter, target blank, class, new window icon, Twitter icon, and that would show in, for example, Bootstrap or something like that, that icon next to it. By using that proper selector, all you have to do is put in there an http://twitter.com to his Twitter account and a target of blank. This works in any case. If the browser doesn't support icons, if the browser doesn't support CSS, it's still a Twitter link. And we know already it's a Twitter link because it starts with twitter.com. And this is what he uses for styling that. So look at the content of your pages and validate it accordingly. Like, why would I keep semantic HTML? Why would I make a proper link if your CSS or your JavaScript doesn't give me something for it? Instead of just teaching people to put classes on everything, we should teach people just to write HTML because that works everywhere. And it doesn't matter if it's going to be my fridge, my car, my dog, or whatever the Internet of Things will going to be next. It will work on that one because it's HTML. It was built for that. This is something I keep seeing, and it drives me crazy. You see list items, and people put a class of list item on every one of them, and a class of a list item first of the first one, and list item last on the last one. This is redundant. This is explaining things that are already given in the structure of the HTML. It's a UL. This means it has LIs in it. There's a first one and a last one. You don't need any of these classes to style any single element in that one differently if you wanted to, if you understand your CSS. We all know link, visited, active, hover, focus, because that's what you apply to styles, to links. I remember the first time when I got CSS and I changed the underline of a link, like, whoa. I once won a pitch with that. It was hilarious. It's like the only company, like, oh, you know CSS already, 97 or something. It was great. But there's also these selectors. First child, last child, ends last child, ends of type, first of type, last of type, empty, target, checked, enabled, disabled, not. All these things are in browsers. You probably have used one or two. But it's great what you can do with those. Say, for example, you have the first child, UL, first LI on the first level, first child, and it becomes this one. The last child, of course, is the last one. You can do nth child odd, every odd one. You can nth child even, every even one. Remember how many times you put classes on every row element of a table? Don't need that anymore. Every browser does this. You can do nth child 3n, which means every third one and then another third one. And the cool thing about that one is you don't need to care about how many elements are in there because the CSS parser does that for you. It realizes it's only 2 of them. It didn't start counting, or when you do it in JavaScript, you loop through it and you wonder how many elements you still got. Not good fun. Nth child 3n plus 1, this is why it becomes a bit cryptic. The third one, it's the same as 4n really. And the support is absolutely there, across the board. Opera Mini, Android browser, Opera Chrome for Android, all of them support this. So think about these selectors next time you write CSS. He's also given a great talk called Effortless Style. That's where he explained all these ideas about it. His first talk ever, so it was really impressive and beautifully done. And then he gave it a silly title called Axiomatic CSS and Lobotomized OWLs. But yeah, we love that kind of stuff, like, ooh, I don't know, isometric JavaScript, these kind of things. Let's do a new thing every year, because otherwise it would get boring at conferences. You don't want to have anything to look forward to. You need to be surprised every single time. DOM manipulation, jQuery. We all need jQuery because it's so hard to write get element by ID and know which one is uppercase and which one isn't and where it's going. Well, query selector all, and that is all you need. And that is working across the browsers again as well. This one takes the same as the dollar selector or the bling selector in jQuery. It takes a CSS selector and that's it. Query selector gives you the first one. Query selector all gives you a node list of all the ones. And it's not a live node list, which is good as well, because the problem with document get elements by tag name or document get elements by class name, it was a live node. So when you took things out of it, you had to change your iterator as well, because otherwise you try to access elements that are not there any longer. With this one, you have a copy of it, and it works. Of course, it's a bit longer than the dollar sign, but it does exactly the same thing, and it works again across all the browsers that we do care about, except for Internet Explorer 8, but I'm going to make sure this thing goes away. Class list, add, remove, toggle, contains. Class list was always my JavaScript interview question. Like, okay, how would you make a function that actually adds classes, asks if there's contain classes, these kind of things, because the class name attribute, terrible. It's just basically a string, and you have to split it on the spaces to see which classes are in there and do an index off on it, and then you have to make sure you have no trailing spaces because Internet Explorer 6 and Internet Explorer 5 didn't like that, and all these terrible things. With class list, you just say class list .add, class, remove, and so on and so forth. Toggle is wonderful. Half the time I don't need to write any loops anymore because I just put a CSS class on a parent element and let the CSS do the rest of the stuff rather than going in JavaScript and putting the color of every text into blue. Why would I ever do that? I want everything that's visual in my CSS. Class list works great. Data attributes. So we have data sound moo and p dataset sound equals moo. That's great if you want to put things on the HTML and you want to keep it maintainable in the HTML, but you don't want to abuse anything else, like a class or an ID or something like that. Datasets are pretty useful. Were a bit of a problem because Internet Explorer didn't support them, but now we have them as well. And there's interesting stuff with that. Because if you think about what I said before, I can use CSS to style any attribute or to detect an element by attribute. So with the dataset, I've got something to connect with JavaScript and with CSS rather than just one of the two, much like class as well. This was supported by IE 11 onwards. And Opera Mini doesn't support, or partly only, but that's also because it does a copy of your HTML. I wrote an article about this quite some time ago, fair enough. And that was what I did with that. I had a little game in DOM, which I probably would do in Canvas now, but it allowed people to style things differently. So I had an ID of data player on a div, the name of data.jo, data.score is 100. And then I can actually use JavaScript to do a query selector on data player. I can read the score with player dataset score. I can read the name with dataset name. I can change the score to something else, and then I can re-show that I changed that score. But I also can do that in CSS. So now if I have a hash data player, which gives me my data, and the data score is 10, then give it a color of red. So if the score is low, then show a different style. So I didn't even need to do that logic in JavaScript. I need to do it when it's 0. But that warning doesn't really make much difference to me in JavaScript, so I can keep that in my CSS. So when I did this in there and I generated the content after, which shows the name and the score as well, because with content in CSS I can create text nodes around the element. And then I basically have my player there. Its name is Joe, its value is 10, and because it's 10, it's red, otherwise it would be gray. So I keep the whole look and feel into the CSS, and that is gorgeous because I can go to a designer and say like, go for it. I have no idea how you do the magic that you do. Please do something beautiful with that and something usable. Here's my code. I don't need to touch it anymore. You can go nuts. And that makes much more sense than trying to negotiate. Here's the 500 list of classes that we used on that element. Please don't type it wrongly and these kind of things. Media queries are interesting. They allow you to apply CSS according to different sizes of the screen or the orientation of the screen, like landscape and portrait. And a lot of people use that for doing a mobile version of the site. Sometimes really abused as well, because putting 12 meg of data in your page and then showing only 200 pixels of it is probably not the best way to do a mobile site. But it's incredible what you can do with this, because you can also generate content accordingly with media queries. The support is wonderful, really works across all the browsers, so use media queries. And even if there's no support, that is an opportunity. That's my biggest problem with, especially with Californian developers, when people say, oh, it doesn't do it, that's crap. If something does not reliably do something, I like that, because I can block that thing that way. So if you say media all and min width 0, or media only is a bit later, min width 0 also work with like older IE, you can put all your CSS into that one, and it will never get applied to browsers that don't understand media queries. That's not bad. It's like doing a get if document query selector around your whole JavaScript. If that's not applied, your JavaScript never gets applied. And I think we should do that. Far too many people give old browsers things they're not really doing anymore. Internet Explorer 6 has earned its keep. It should go into the wild and should be on a farm and have fun and deal with other browsers there, talk with Netscape over how good the old times were. Don't give it animations and stuff because it just chokes on that. You don't go to an old person and say, let's run around in the park. We do that with Internet Explorer 6 if we give it like great JavaScript animations and stuff. It's not meant for that. So the problem though is that media queries, even when you put them in your CSS, everything gets loaded. So if I have a 2 megabyte picture that is for a retina display that is like 6,000 pixels wide, and that CSS never gets applied in the media query, but the image still gets loaded. It's because CSS gets analyzed first, and all the images and everything gets loaded, and then you have a problem. So what do you do with that? You have inline media queries. You can actually say on your link element, media screen width 600 pixels, media screen and 4,000 pixels, and you would expect that only one of them gets loaded. Sadly enough, no. Browsers try to be clever and try to pre-cache a lot of stuff for us. So both of those CSS files and all the images in there will get loaded, even if only one of those get applied. So how do you do that? I don't know my slides. MatchMedia, the JavaScript brother of media queries. It's exactly the same thing. It's just in JavaScript, and how nice is that? So I can say if window matchMedia, screen and min width is 600 pixels, document write out the link element and put it in there. This is a very dirty way of doing it. I don't like document write. I had to use it for years. Don't want to do that any longer. But it's one simple way of doing it. Quick side thing. Stack Overflow, who here goes there for learning things? Stop. Now, there's good things in there, but some of the solutions you see, I saw the other day somebody did a redirection of a PHP script by writing out a JavaScript that did a document location href. So I don't even know, did he want people to inject code or what was going on there? So always give good answers, don't give the fast answers. We have to get better at that. Anyways, no document write. Support is good except for 8 and 9 Internet Explorer. Again, we're going to fix that. And yeah, your document.yougottobekiddin is not a good idea. So data attributes is what I used for that. So I said data media and data href. and a class of media query dependent, which is probably in hindsight I should have used another word because it's a bit long. But what did I do with that? I made this media query JavaScript thing applicable to anything. So I can now have an image with a data source and a data alternative text for the image, and a class of media query dependent and a media query, and then say if it's 600 pixels, then load that image. If not, don't load that image. And all I had to do was loop over all the elements with media query dependent, and when it's available and the media set has been set on the data set, and the media is matched by the current browser, then change all the other attributes and take the media out of it. Which means when I have the image, for example, and it's more than 600 pixels, then all this data source becomes a source, data alt becomes an alt, and class stays the same. So the image gets loaded only when that style gets applied, only when the 600 pixels is true. And that's one way to work around that issue that not all of them has been loaded. But JavaScript dependency is bad, so you can still do an href standard CSS and a data href green CSS when that media has been matched. So that way it can never fail. You just get a standard CSS when you don't quite know what the browser is doing. At least you have some styling going on there. Now, video was the big thing in HTML5. It's not that exciting anymore, but remember we used to flash on this massive blob of things, something in there. We didn't know what all these attributes were. We just copied and pasted from the MacroMedia website and hoped everything is fine. We wanted video. We really wanted it, and we wanted to control it. And we almost got there, and it was not bad. Fallbacks are a very important thing. I tried in my keynote, people are offline, there's bad connections, you never know if your stuff gets loaded. So having an alternative cute kitten photo for the met.jpg is a very good idea, because at least people would know that there is a kitten photo and then maybe reload the page or come back or something like that. Of course, people who cannot see the cute kitten still would like to know there's a cute kitten, because otherwise it's no internet. Internet without cats is just not possible. You can also test these fallbacks in the image case. So I can say a document query selector image. If there's an error on the image and the natural width and the natural height is 0, then I know that the image has not been loaded. I can 100% know that this image has not been loaded. This is how ad blockers work, because they actually test if the ad has been expanded or not, if the offset height is 0 or not. So that way you can test if the image has been loaded or not. Now, I wanted to do the same with video. Video is pretty cool. You do video controls, give it a controls. You say dynamic search.mp4, which is an MP4 which wasn't supported by all browsers. Now it's finally supported by all of them as well, using evil close technology in all browsers. And a fallback, you have just a link to the video with an image in there saying the alternative text, what it's supposed to be, and an explanation. Click the image to play the video of the dynamic app search. This is cool on many levels. First of all, if the video doesn't work, you still get an image and you can click it and you watch it in VLC or whatever video player you use. Secondly, if you put that into as a link into Facebook, Facebook indexes that image as the thumbnail. Cool, social media win as well. Except it doesn't work. It only works in browsers that don't support the video tag, which don't exist any longer. All of them support the video tag, but not all of them support MP4. So we had to find a way to test if MP4 is supported in the browser. And this is getting interesting, because we're almost getting this so close with that. There's an API that we could get. We can ask the browser if it understands a certain video format. And then the browser tells us something. The only issue with it is it's not going anywhere. Because when you look at the API, you would expect a video having an error handler. Like the image has an error handler, right? Video on error, great, the video could not be loaded. It has an error handler on the last source element in the page, in the video element itself. So what you have to do is you have a query selector on the video, then you have to query selector on all the sources in the video, find the last one. If there was an error handler on that one and something went wrong, then we create the inner HTML of the video element, replace the video element with the inner HTML. Simple. That's sadly enough the only way to test if the browser supports a video and actually can display it as well. There's also a function called canPlayType. And canPlayType sounds interesting, like I give it MP4, can you play MP4? And you get 3 versions back. You can say, it gives you either probably, maybe, or an empty string. I don't know who's responsible, but I want to meet that person, because it's like an API that I have to date. You know, like, so are we going out? Maybe. It's so stupid. Like, it's like, no, these are 3 results that are all useless. So please give me something better. Canvas is one of my favorite things, because Canvas allows me to draw stuff. Of course, everybody says Canvas is for games, so use Phaser.io or use other libraries, so Pixie.js that actually allows you to use WebGL and fallback to Canvas if WebGL is not supported. But to me, it's much better than that. It's just a very simple painting API, and you can do amazing stuff with Canvas. This is Photoshop in the browser using Canvas. Not all Photoshop, of course, because I don't even know what is Photoshop by now. Like, it's very confusing. But for normal painting, no, actually Illustrator, it's using SVG, and it gives you like all kind of path generation, so you can paint things in the browser, and that looks gorgeous. It's a very basic painting API in the browser. And it's also not the most, sometimes it has this PHP-isms where something is called begin path, but not close path, begin path and close path. To me, that should be begin path and end path, or open path and close path. But yeah, developers. Of course, Flash developers look at that thing and think, yeah, right, look what we have, haha. And look how it doesn't work on an iPad. So that's what I say then. But to me, it's a collection of pixels. And I come from a Commodore 64 background. I love pixels. I just had 3 months of paid holiday, and I did a lot of stuff where I just painted with pixels again. And one of the things, I wrote a massive article about how I built a logo generator from fonts that are actually in Commodore 64 demos. So you can type something in there, and you can select the font, you can change the colors and fix them to the colors that the Commodore 64 was hardwired to, and you can select from like 47 different fonts and change the colors around, and you get all kind of zooming and things going on there. And in that article, I explained all the bits and bobs that I wrote to make that work. And that's all in the browser. That works across the browsers again. And I think it's a very cool thing what we can do with that. There's also something called zoom and pick, where you can just hover over an image and you get a zooming thing up there, and you can pick your colors from that image, and then you have a collection of images and can generate a CSS file with all these colors in them. So if you have a company logo and you don't want to get a third-party tool, you can do that in the browser immediately as well. And that generates the CSS for you afterwards as well. Then you go Canvas and you put the file reader together, and everything becomes awesome. Because what you can do with that, I gave, for example, a talk in TEDx in Linz in Austria about security and about privacy, about social media, really. And one thing that people forget is that every picture that you take with your mobile phone also doesn't show me the picture, but it also shows me where you've taken that, and with what camera, and what all kind of information in there. So all the EXIF data is in there. That's why I had a command line tool where I showed people to get all this information out of their images before they upload it somewhere, but it was too hard for them to use, so I wrote removephotodata.com. That allows you to drag an image into the browser, get all these things out there, and save the image back into your computer without any of the EXIF data being in there. It doesn't have a server, it doesn't go anywhere, it works offline. You can actually load it on your phone once and it will be there forever, unless you delete it again. So I wanted to make sure that it's very easy for people to remove their personal data. So say, for example, you got Willy the Wombat here, and I used EXIF.js, which is a JavaScript library, to read EXIF data from an image. So if I do that, then I find out all these things about that picture, like what camera it was taken with, where it was taken, what time, and so on and so forth, what the original pixel dimensions are. Now I just take this image and I put it on a canvas element with these amount of code. That's all I needed to do. Query select a canvas, get context 2D, get the image height, get the image width, draw an image onto the canvas, and then I needed to say an ahref with c2data URL image JPEG, which turns it into a JPEG with the 0.9 quality. You can also do an image PNG, then the quality stays the same, but it's a bigger file. And a download attribute, which means you just define a name, and when I now click on this one in a browser, it downloads it under the name, the L name that I defined in that function. That's all I needed to do to clean the EXIF data out of an image. all done in the browser because I make a copy of it in the canvas. The canvas was even not visible. It doesn't need to be. It can just give you that data. So you can even use it in a Node.js script with Xcanvas and all kind of things. And yeah, the EXIF data is gone. Support is good. The file reader API works across all the browsers except for Opera Mini because it's not really a browser but a service to stream the HTML into your device. The support for the file API to manipulating objects is also good. It was a bit weird in older Androids on Android browsers, and 8 and 9 Internet Explorer didn't quite do it either. The download attribute, not so much. That actually is not even in Internet Explorer 11. Again, I will do something about this. But there is a file called filesaver.js which allows you to do the same thing, and it just overloads the download attribute for the browsers that don't actually support it. Another thing I did was make thumbnails.com, which hopefully is no sound in it. Yeah. This one I went even further. So I just dragged and dropped images onto a Dropbox and onto a thing, and then you get a thumbnails.zip. So it creates thumbnails from every single image in that one, and then you can see the smaller thumbnail if you wanted to. So this one can also be part of a build script or something like that, but I just love the idea that I can create a zip file in the browser nowadays. How cool is that? You could put that into all of your content management systems. People could drag 20 files in there, you create one zip file, you upload one file, which is probably much smaller than the 20 files that they had before. And you can set all the size of that. You can say if it's going to be a JPEG or a PNG, and so on and so forth. So I think using File Reader and using Canvas, you can do a lot of really good things in CRM systems, in like boring business things, because people don't want to do 5 steps when they could use one. Or you think. Actually, I have this Stockholm syndrome, which is kind of weird in the city. But it's a Stockholm syndrome of interfaces. You go to these companies, they have these horrible, horrible interfaces, and you show them something simpler. No, we did this for 4 years, we don't want to learn something new. It's really, really hard at times. I think sometimes you have to wait for them to die. JavaScript evolves, of course, as well. I mean, we're not stopping with this one here. An interesting one is arrays. There's new array methods that you probably will have known already from other languages. We have things like index of is now available on an array. It's always only a string, which was like really annoying because do I know if that thing is in the array? So I had to loop over the whole array and compare everything, every single element with it. And this one now, it returns the first index at which given element can be found in the array, or -1 if it's not present. So you save yourself a loop with that one. You have filter. This one creates a new array with all the elements that pass the test of a provided function. So you can do a comparison, for example, or if it's less than 10, if it's more than 10. And it creates the original array and keeps the original array as well, so you can compare the two later on if you wanted to. For each allows you to loop over elements in each array. And people get super excited about this, because now I can make a function, and instead of looping over the array and doing a cache of it, I can just do a for each. It's much slower than a for loop, because it actually generates a known function, and especially when you use an anonymous function and not a reused function. So there's use cases for that, but not everything has to become a for each. And that's the same as it was in PHP before as well. Sometimes a for loop is not a bad thing. Or what I normally do is just I store the length of an array in a variable, and then I do a while minus on that variable, because if it's going to 0, and length is always the length of the array plus 1. So that makes it much shorter, so I don't have to use 2 variables for that. Other things we have is map and reduce. So it creates a new array with the results of calling a function on every element in this array. And we have a reduce, so that's map reduce like you expected in any other language as well. So this is now in languages in there. Template strings are a really interesting one to me, because a lot of people, and that started when I was a PHP developer, people always wanted to have template engines in PHP, not understanding that PHP itself is not only horrible, but also a template language. It was never meant to be anything else, but it became something much, much bigger. So people always come up with like templating languages around other languages. So in JavaScript, we had like script type text HTML, and then you had like handlebars and whatever they were called. Mustache was the first one, I think, that allows you to do a lot of templating in JavaScript itself with HTML, and you had like 15 curly braces and all kind of stuff in there. Now with ES6, the new upcoming standard of HTML, of JavaScript, which is fully supported in the new Spartan browser in Internet from Microsoft and Mozilla's as well and Chrome's as well. You have string substitution. The main difference between normal strings and template strings is that instead of the quote or the double quote, you use a backtick. So the log JavaScript thing here. So this one teaches a lot of people new things about their keyboard as well, because they've never used that one before. And it's quite fun to see French people trying to find it, because it's really weird. So what that one does is string substitution. So you say JavaScript first appeared $A plus B years ago, and that's crazy. And that one turns it into JavaScript first appeared 20 years ago. That's crazy, because it takes A and B, and it puts it together and replaces that $curly brace with the result of that calculation. You have something like that in CSS as well. If you haven't looked it up, calc in CSS, it's amazing. So you can do 100% width div, minus 50 pixels on 25 padding on each side. You don't have the problem with the horrible overflow any longer. The other one is that you can do proper math with it, like 2 times A plus B and 10 times A plus B as well. So that one does another string substitution for you. You can also have functions. So you can say function fn returns 42. And then you can say meaning of life is fn, and it gets the function back. So you can use any of the inbuilt functionality with that as well. All the string manipulations that you already have in JavaScript can now become part of a string that gets automatically calculated for you. And you can have a data set, for example, Douglas Adams here, with name on it, and you say, actually there's a mistake in there, so I have to change that to author username. I'm so good. So author name uppercase, and then I can read that out, and it would read it out as like, I really enjoy Douglas Adams. It doesn't look cool, but I think it's a very, very important step to make JavaScript much more simpler for string manipulation instead of having to have another library to go in between there. It also gives us finally multiline strings, because the evil way of doing it was the backslash on every line break, which is just so not maintainable. And the other one was, of course, putting quotes around everything and then concatenating it with a plus, which is, again, quite funny if you do it with multiple lines and becomes rather unreadable. With these template strings in ES6, all I have to do is like, you just made the first step into a larger world, and it automatically realizes there's a beginning and there's an end, and it's still the same string. And the white space becomes part of that string as well. So remember how many times you had to have, like, you loaded some JavaScript in, you wanted to display in the page, and then you had to split it on the line breaks and had to put spaces up in front and the back. All of that can be done with a multiple string now, with a multiple line string. There's more on that tomorrow from my ex-colleague, my colleague in Mozilla, Florian Scholz, 11 to 12 o'clock tomorrow. What's next for JavaScript? All the new things that are coming in ECMAScript 6 and ECMAScript 5. So if you like Java and you want to like JavaScript more, that's a great talk for you to go to. Big thing to me, and I said it in the keynote, is offline apps. Offline is just very, very important to me, because it just happens. You know, there's like things in the sky that we can't reach, and sometimes we didn't pay our bill, or somebody actually smashed into the wire in my street. My whole street in London was offline for a week because somebody just crashed into one of these boxes with all the cables inside. And that could be fixed in a few minutes, but then like 5 different mobile providers were fighting over each other who has to fix it. And what interested me more was in the building that I live, it's like 20 parties in there. I was the only one that complained that the internet is gone. Everybody else just using their mobile phones or doesn't care, and you're like, no, it's no internet, I don't have anything else in my life, I feel sad. But offline is super important. There's a simple way of doing it. There's app cache. You will have read probably about it that there's lots of problems in app cache. We know. It's going to get replaced. It's going to get fixed. More on that later. But for simple resources, like for an index HTML, that is just the outline of your app, perfect. Like the removephoto.data.com just uses an app cache. In the app cache file, you just list all the resources that you want to have offline. Second time the person goes on that page, they're there. They don't even get loaded from your server any longer. It's all good. They also have app cache also has an event handler on it, so you know when there's a new version of the data available, then you can actually ask the user to reload the page. So it works quite nicely. You can store resources in web storage. That's the local storage or session storage. Local storage means that you have a key value pair to store data in your browser. Very simple. Session storage only does it as soon as the browser gets closed or even the tab gets closed, the session storage goes away as well. So that's something you can do for transactions or things like that. That everybody gets excited about this on mobile. Nobody uses it on desktop. I've got about 20 gig left on this hard drive. Please put some data there. I don't want to load everything from your server the whole time. If the thing doesn't change, why do you treat your server so badly? Just let people have it on their machines and not actually go to the internet for everything. But we can put more cats on it. That's what the internet needs. Of course, it's a name value pair and only with strings. That's another big problem that was with it. So you can JSON decode and encode strings to put into that one. Of course, you shouldn't use data there that is not to be read by people, because I can always go to my browser developer tools and read out local storage. So it's a cookie that's very readable. So make sure you don't put things in there. It's also limited, and there's sadly enough not a proper API to tell me how much I've used already and how much is still available. And this is where it gets really cool. If you give a good developer a limitation, we go nuts. The Financial Times in England was one of the first ones to build an offline app in HTML5, and that was on iPad 1 that they targeted as one of the main things that people will read it on. And it has 5 meg of data for local storage. It also, so they needed more data. So they're like, okay, the other APIs weren't there yet, so what do we do? So they found out, get this, UTF-16 encoding is possible in local storage. All their texts are in English, so they only need UTF-8, they actually only need ASCII. So what they did is they took the ASCII characters and encoded them into Chinese and Japanese glyphs in UTF-16. So you actually had 10 meg instead of 5 meg, because it was 16 versus 8. And completely unreadable as well, so it was kind of like encrypting it at the same time. And I just love this when people go so deep into the geekiness of it. And there's a great article on it. I did something similar in Yahoo when I started to encode JavaScript into an image, because I can read it out with Canvas, and an image, when it's a PNG, gets automatically gzipped by the browser. So you don't need to do any gzipping on the server anymore, although it's nuts. It was just basically the Yahoo logo and then a lot of JavaScript under it that I cropped off. So it was, the whole page was one HTTP request. Sadly, never got into production, and people told me I'm crazy. If you have larger storage, if you need better things, there's IndexedDB and there's WebSQL. Support is okay if you put them two together. There's a great library called LocalForage, which just gives you a key and value pair, and it uses whatever the browser under the hood supports. So you don't need to worry about the differences in IndexedDB and in WebSQL, and WebSQL is awful anyways. Ideas of offline. Store static, unchanged content using app cache. Make your page an empty bowl and the rest goes in there, but load as much as possible that people can have up front. Offer interfaces for users. Do you want to store this for later? Nobody does that. Everybody just expects users to want to do that or not want to do that. Why not ask them from time to time? You've been typing in for half an hour, shall we do a save for you? WordPress does this nicely, and other editors do it as well. Check the battery status and remind people to store instead of polling and storing. Because they're my favorite when the battery status is slow and then people start doing things for me and the battery gets even faster slower and lower. So ask people like, oh, your battery is 10%, you might want to save that. Shall I stop trying to do the, I don't know, image optimization automatically or like loading things from the background? It's just nice to ask people, and Android Lollipop does that now with their mode that it actually doesn't go to the radio any longer all the time. That's not a bad idea. Start with a very simple, easy to cache version that loads more on demand. Like, make the thing just work and then do the fancy bits afterwards. And why not? It's like at least something will always be there, and something is better than absolutely nothing, or a spinner. That shows you like my big annoyance. Like, if you just spin me something that doesn't tell me anything, at least tell me how much has been loaded already. That's what Flash did better. And you don't want to go back to that world. Store resources locally, libraries, font, images. Like, if these things are not going to change anytime soon, your font is probably not going to change for a long, long time. Why does it have to be loaded every single time from the web? Doesn't need to be. You can still get the function there. Peter, another colleague of mine from Mozilla, actually a Swedish guy, did this test about LocalForage versus XHR. LocalForage, as I said before, is that library that does local storage for you. And he did AJAX requests and IndexedDB requests. And the average AJAX request was 787 milliseconds. The average IndexedDB request, 25 milliseconds. Guess what's a better interface? What's a more responsive interface? What's more fun for the user? And you have it. Just use the thing. Be frugal with your resources. Think about, really, do I need that image, or is it nice to have a background color first and load the image later on demand? Don't load everything just because we can. The amount of times I shaved like 500 milliseconds off the JavaScript with like painstaking efforts and everything, and then people don't optimize their images, and out of a sudden there's 20 meg of images in there. Like, no, tell me what you want to do with that, and then we find a way to make it easier as well. Put the web on a diet, slim down your dependencies. Do you really need Bootstrap, JavaScript, and the other help images when there's users on a mobile? I mean, I showed you like with a media query or with a matchMedia, you can test if the thing is actually capable of showing pictures this big. You might not want to load it. Think about the icon fonts, sprites, and other ways to reduce HTTP requests. HTTP requests are the devil. They're super slow, they always are a problem. So they can always fail, they don't even tell you when they're failing. So make sure that you do as few HTTP requests as possible. In an HTTP2 world or in a speedy world, different story, but not everybody has that yet. Are you using the whole fonts when you only need a few chars? Do you need all the weights and versions of the font? You see that a lot when people use web fonts. Google Fonts actually allows you to define a range. To say like, I only need the numbers of that font and I don't need the whole font, and it actually downloads only the glyphs of these numbers and the rest of the font gets untouched. So that could be a difference between 20K and 5 meg. So think about that one as well. Find extra fat and remove it. In Firefox, you've got this wonderful thing called CSS coverage. You just go into the GCLI and you type CSS coverage start, then you start navigating through your whole page and load everything, and then you do CSS coverage stop, and it shows you the CSS file and cuts out everything that wasn't used. So all the CSS that you put there 5 years ago because of that Christmas special that is not in the website any longer, you realize that you can actually delete, and it's not necessary any longer. Chrome has the same thing with audits, and you can even define a speed that is not the speed of the page. So you can test it on a 3G or on an edge conversion, and it gives you a nice result anyways, then later what you can do better with the page. So let's make the web worldwide again. I think it's the time when I started with the internet, it looked horrible, but at least it loaded fast. And nowadays I'm just very tired of seeing spinners and seeing things that should be pretty, but I don't get to them. So HTML5 is there. It's supported by the browsers. Look around the things and dare to use them. You will find out that a lot of the things that we are worried about don't exist any longer because browsers, strangely enough, got better over time as well. And I think that's all I got, except for you're it. You have to go for it now. This is in the Spotify office here in Stockholm, and I love it. Think it, build it, ship it, tweak it. Don't make it perfect and then start building it. Our job is never done. We're never finished. It moves on, and that's what I love about working on the web. Share, find, and reuse. Use JSFiddle, use GitHub, use JSBin. If you have a question on Stack Overflow, don't try to describe the question. Just make a JSBin or a JSFiddle and tell people like, this is broken, what am I doing wrong? People can fork that, can fix it for you. You can explain it to each other that way. We can communicate. GitHub is a social developer network. That sounds like a thing that didn't work, but it does. And that's all I have, so thanks very much.